Marcus Williams stood at the kitchen sink, scrubbing the last plate from dinner while his 7-year-old daughter Emma worked on her math homework at the small wooden table behind him. The apartment was quiet except for the soft scratching of her pencil and the occasional frustrated sigh when she encountered a difficult problem. "Dad, I can't figure out this one," Emma called out, her voice carrying that familiar note of exhaustion that came at the end of long days. Marcus dried his hands on the dish towel and walked over to her. The problem was simple multiplication, but he could see the numbers swimming before her tired eyes. They had been at this routine for 3 years now, ever since Sarah had passed away from cancer, leaving Marcus to navigate single parenthood while working 2 jobs to keep their small family afloat. "Let's take a break." "Sweetheart," he said gently, closing the workbook. "We can finish this tomorrow morning before school." Emma nodded gratefully and climbed into his lap, something she still did when the weight of missing her mother became too heavy. Marcus held her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, and tried not to think about the stack of unpaid bills sitting on his dresser upstairs. His day job as a maintenance worker at downtown office buildings paid decent money, but it wasn't enough to cover Emma's after-school care, their rent, groceries, and the mounting medical debt left over from Sarah's treatment. That's why he had taken the evening job cleaning offices, working from 6 in the evening until midnight, 5 days a week. Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor, watched Emma during those hours for a small fee that Marcus could barely afford but couldn't do without. The next evening, Marcus was pushing his cleaning cart through the marble lobby of the Meridian Tower, one of the city's most prestigious office buildings. At 42 floors, it housed some of the wealthiest companies and individuals in the state. He had been cleaning these floors for 8 months, always working after hours when the building was empty except for security guards and the occasional workaholic executive. Tonight felt different, though. As he approached the elevator bank on the 38th floor, he noticed light spilling from under the door of the penthouse office suite. The nameplate read, "Victoria Sterling, CEO, Sterling Enterprises." Marcus had never seen anyone in that office before, despite cleaning it twice a week for months. He knocked softly on the door, following protocol to announce his presence before entering. A woman's voice called out for him to come in, and Marcus pushed open the heavy wooden door with his shoulder while maneuvering the cart. Victoria Sterling was nothing like he had imagined. She sat behind an enormous glass desk, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city lights below. She appeared to be in her early 40s with short auburn hair and sharp green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Her business suit probably cost more than Marcus made in 3 months. But what struck him most was how tired she looked, despite her composed exterior. "I'm sorry to disturb you," Marcus said, pausing near the entrance. "I can come back later if you're working." "No, please continue," she replied, gesturing for him to proceed. "I've been here since 6 this morning. The sound of normal activity might help clear my head." Marcus began his routine, emptying trash bins and wiping down surfaces while trying to remain as invisible as possible. He had learned that wealthy people preferred their service staff to blend into the background. But as he worked, he couldn't help but notice that Victoria Sterling kept glancing at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Excuse me," she said, when he was halfway through cleaning. "I don't mean to pry, but you look familiar. Do we know each other?" Marcus paused in his dusting. "I don't think so, ma'am. I clean your office twice a week, but you're usually not here." "No, that's not it." She stood up and walked closer, studying his face. "Marcus Williams, right? You were married to Sarah Williams, the teacher at Lincoln Elementary." The mention of his wife's name hit Marcus like a physical blow. He hadn't heard anyone speak about Sarah in months, and certainly not in this context. "Yes, that was my wife." "Did you know her?" Victoria's expression softened considerably. "She was my daughter Olivia's teacher 3 years ago. 3rd grade. Olivia still talks about Mrs. Williams and how kind she was when Olivia was struggling with reading. Sarah stayed after school with her twice a week for months, never charging anything extra. She helped turn Olivia from hating school into loving it." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. Sarah had often mentioned a bright little girl who needed extra help, though she never gave details about the families she worked with. It was just like her to quietly change a child's life without expecting recognition. "I heard about her illness," Victoria continued quietly. "I wanted to help somehow, maybe contribute to medical expenses, but I was told the family preferred privacy. I respected that, but I always regretted not doing more. That sounds like Sarah, Marcus managed to say. She never wanted to be a burden to anyone, even when she was the one who needed help. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows. Marcus had never spoken this openly with anyone from this world of wealth and power, but something about Victoria's genuine warmth made it feel natural. "How are you managing?" she asked. "I know it can't be easy, especially with a child." Marcus almost laughed at the understatement, but he caught himself. "We're getting by. Emma's a strong kid and we take it one day at a time." Victoria nodded thoughtfully, then returned to her desk. Marcus finished his cleaning in companionable quiet, hyper-aware that this chance encounter had somehow shifted something in the atmosphere of the room. As he prepared to leave, Victoria looked up from her work. "Marcus, would you mind if I asked you something tomorrow night? I'll be here late again, and I'd like to continue our conversation." "Of course, ma'am," he replied, though he couldn't imagine what more there was to discuss. As Marcus rode the elevator down to the lobby, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, curiosity about what tomorrow might bring. He had no way of knowing that Victoria Sterling had spent the evening thinking not just about Sarah's kindness to her daughter, but about a proposal that would soon change both their lives forever. The following evening, Marcus found himself looking forward to his shift at the Meridian Tower in a way he hadn't anticipated. Throughout his day job, installing new light fixtures in a medical building across town, his mind kept drifting back to his conversation with Victoria Sterling. There had been something refreshing about talking to someone who remembered Sarah with such genuine fondness. Emma had been particularly clingy that morning, wrapping her arms around his waist before school and whispering that she missed Mommy extra today. These moments always gutted Marcus, reminding him how much his daughter was sacrificing because of circumstances beyond her control. At 7 years old, she was already more mature than many kids twice her age, helping with household chores and never complaining when Marcus had to leave for his evening job. Mrs. Chen had noticed Emma's mood too. "She drew pictures of her mama again today," the elderly woman reported when Marcus picked Emma up after work. "I think the school pictures coming up next week are making her sad. She keeps asking if her mama will be able to see them." Marcus's heart ached as he looked at Emma's latest drawing, a crayon masterpiece showing 3 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. The middle figure had angel wings and a halo. His daughter's way of keeping Sarah present in their daily lives both comforted and broke his heart. After putting Emma to bed with extra stories and cuddles, Marcus made his way to the Meridian Tower. Security guard Frank waved him through the lobby with their usual friendly nod. Frank had been working the night shift for 15 years and had seen countless cleaning staff come and go. But he had taken a particular liking to Marcus because of his work ethic and respectful demeanor. "That fancy lady on 38 has been asking when you usually get to her floor," Frank mentioned as Marcus signed in. "Seemed real interested in making sure she didn't miss you." Marcus felt a flutter of nervousness he couldn't explain. There was something about Victoria Sterling that intrigued him beyond their shared connection to Sarah. She carried herself with the confidence that came from success, but there had been vulnerability in her eyes when she spoke about her daughter and her regrets about not helping during Sarah's illness. When he reached the 38th floor, the light was indeed on in Victoria's office. This time when he knocked, she opened the door herself, greeting him with a warm smile that transformed her entire face. "Marcus, thank you for coming. I realize this might seem odd, but I've been thinking about our conversation all day. Please come in and sit down. I'd like to talk to you about something important." The office felt different tonight. Instead of sitting behind her imposing desk, Victoria had arranged 2 comfortable chairs near the windows, with a small table between them holding 2 cups of coffee and a plate of cookies. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the setup. "I thought we could talk more comfortably this way. And I remembered from Olivia's school events that Sarah always brought the most amazing homemade cookies, so I had my assistant pick these up from that bakery on 5th Street that she used to recommend." The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught Marcus off guard. In his world, people were kind when they could afford to be. But deliberate thoughtfulness was a luxury few had time for. He accepted the coffee gratefully and settled into the chair, feeling slightly awkward in his work clothes in such an elegant setting. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding taking things one day at a time," Victoria began, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. I admire that philosophy, but I also know from experience that sometimes opportunities arise that can change the trajectory of those days significantly. Marcus nodded politely. Unsure where this was heading, Victoria took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for what she was about to say. I want to be completely honest with you, Marcus. Over the past year, I've been facing some challenges in my personal life that have made me reevaluate many things. My ex-husband is fighting me for custody of Olivia, and his legal team has been painting me as someone who cares more about business success than family. They're arguing that my wealth and career focus make me an unfit mother. She paused, looking out at the city lights. And Marcus could see the pain in her profile. The irony is that everything I've built has been for Olivia's future. But the court case has made me realize that success means nothing if you lose the people who matter most. My lawyers have advised me that having a stable, committed relationship would significantly strengthen my case. Someone who could demonstrate that I understand the value of family and partnership. Marcus began to feel uncomfortable, sensing that this conversation was heading somewhere he wasn't prepared to go. I need to ask you something that might sound shocking, Victoria continued, turning to face him directly. And I want you to know that I've given this considerable thought. I'm not making this proposal lightly, or without understanding how it might sound. She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a sealed envelope, placing it on the table between them. I am prepared to offer you $1 million to marry me for 1 year. It would be a business arrangement, designed to help me retain custody of my daughter while providing you with the financial security to give Emma the life she deserves. You would live in my home, play the role of my husband in public settings, and help demonstrate to the court that I value family stability. Marcus stared at her, certain he had misheard. I'm sorry, what? $1 million, Marcus. Tax-free, with half paid immediately upon signing a contract, and half paid when the arrangement concludes after 1 year. You would have your own living quarters in my home. Emma would attend the best private school in the city, and you would have access to health care, legal representation, and anything else you might need. The room fell completely silent except for the distant hum of traffic far below. Marcus's mind raced, trying to process what he had just heard. $1 million. It was more money than he could make in 20 years of working both his current jobs. It would eliminate every financial worry, pay off all of Sarah's medical debt, and give Emma opportunities he had only dreamed of providing. But it was also the most bizarre proposition he had ever received. You don't know anything about me, he said finally. We've had exactly one real conversation. How do you know I'm not a terrible person who would take your money and disappear? Victoria smiled slightly. I know more than you think. I know that Sarah trusted you enough to build a life with you. I know that you're working 2 jobs to support your daughter rather than taking shortcuts or looking for easy money. I know that you've been cleaning my office for 8 months and have never taken so much as a pen, despite having access to expensive equipment and information. She leaned forward slightly, her expression earnest. Most importantly, I know that when Olivia was struggling, your wife stayed late without pay to help a child who wasn't even her responsibility. That kind of character doesn't exist in isolation, Marcus. It comes from being part of a family that values doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was suggesting. The practical part of his mind was already calculating what this money could mean for Emma's future. But another part of him recoiled at the idea of essentially being paid to pretend to be someone's husband. I need time to think about this, he said quietly. Of course, Victoria replied immediately. Take all the time you need. The envelope contains more details about what the arrangement would entail, along with contact information for the attorney who would handle the contract. There's no pressure, Marcus. If you decide this isn't right for you, we'll never speak of it again, and it won't affect your job here in any way. Marcus picked up the envelope, feeling its weight in his hands. Inside was a document that could change everything for him and Emma, but he had no idea if accepting would be the best decision of his life or the biggest mistake he could make. Marcus spent the next 3 days carrying Victoria's envelope in his jacket pocket like a talisman, pulling it out during quiet moments but never quite finding the courage to open it. The weight of the decision pressed on him constantly, making it difficult to focus on his regular routines. On Thursday morning, while Emma ate her cereal and chattered about an upcoming field trip to the Science Museum, Marcus found himself studying her face and wondering what Sarah would want him to do. Emma had been asking lately why they couldn't afford things that other kids had. Questions that cut deep because there were no easy answers. "Dad, Jessica's mom is taking us to the movies this weekend," Emma said, interrupting his thoughts. "But I told her we probably can't afford it right now." "That's okay, right?" The casual way his 7-year-old daughter had learned to manage his financial limitations broke something inside Marcus. Emma shouldn't have to think about money at her age, shouldn't have to automatically assume that fun activities were out of reach. Sarah would have hated seeing their daughter grow up with such constraints. That evening, Marcus finally opened the envelope while Emma was at Mrs. Chen's apartment. The contract was surprisingly straightforward, written in language he could understand rather than dense legal terminology. The arrangement would last exactly 12 months with clear expectations for both parties. He would maintain the appearance of being Victoria's husband at social functions and legal proceedings, while she would provide financial support and housing for both him and Emma. The document emphasized that this was strictly a business relationship, with separate living quarters and no expectation of physical intimacy. Marcus would be free to date other people discreetly, and Victoria retained the same right. Most importantly, Emma would be enrolled in Riverside Academy, one of the city's most prestigious private schools with full tuition, uniforms, and expenses covered. Marcus read through the papers 3 times, looking for hidden clauses or unreasonable demands, but everything seemed legitimate. The financial terms were even more generous than Victoria had initially described, including a monthly stipend for personal expenses and a comprehensive health care plan that would cover both him and Emma. The next evening, Marcus knocked on Victoria's office door with a mixture of determination and terror. She looked up from her computer with expectant eyes, and he could see that she had been hoping for this conversation. "I've read through everything," he began, settling into the chair that had become familiar over their previous talks. "I have some questions and some conditions of my own." Victoria nodded encouragingly. "Of course. This needs to work for both of us. First, I want to understand exactly what this means for Emma. She's been through enough upheaval in her young life. I won't put her through anything that might hurt her emotionally, no matter how much money is involved." "Emma's well-being is actually central to why I think this could work," Victoria replied. "Olivia needs stability too, and having another child in the house might help both girls adjust to the situation. I've already spoken with the school counselor at Riverside Academy about helping children from blended families transition smoothly." Marcus was impressed by how thoroughly Victoria had thought through the practical aspects of the arrangement. "What happens if your custody case resolves quickly? What if you win or lose before the year is up?" "The contract runs for the full 12 months regardless of the custody outcome," Victoria explained. "If I win custody early, we still maintain the arrangement to establish a stable pattern for Olivia. If I lose, frankly, I'll need the emotional support even more. And what about Emma's relationship with her mother's memory? I won't have anyone trying to replace Sarah or making Emma feel like she's betraying her mother by accepting this new living situation." Victoria's expression grew gentle. "Marcus, I would never try to replace Sarah in Emma's heart. From what I remember of her, she was an extraordinary woman who clearly raised her daughter with love and wisdom. I hope that over time Emma and I can develop our own relationship, but it would be based on friendship and respect, not as a replacement mother figure." They talked for over 2 hours, working through logistics and concerns. Victoria explained that her home had a separate wing that would give Marcus and Emma complete privacy, while still allowing them to participate in family activities when appropriate. She also assured him that he could continue his day job if he wanted to maintain that sense of independence and purpose. "There's something else I need you to understand," Marcus said as their conversation began to wind down. "I'm not sophisticated like the people in your social circle. I don't know about fine wines or expensive restaurants or whatever cultural events you probably attend. I'm going to seem completely out of place in your world." Victoria smiled at this concern. "Marcus, the whole point is that you're genuine. My ex-husband's family is full of people who were born into wealth and have never known struggle. The court needs to see that I value authenticity and character over social status. Your background isn't a liability. It's exactly what makes this arrangement credible. What about Olivia? How do you plan to explain this to her?" "I'm going to tell her the truth, adapted for her age level. That you and Emma are friends who need help. And we're friends who can provide help, and sometimes grown-ups make arrangements to help each other through difficult times. Children are remarkably adaptable when they feel secure and loved. As Marcus prepared to leave that night, Victoria handed him a business card with a phone number written on the back. "This is my personal cell phone," she said. "Take the weekend to think about everything we've discussed. If you decide to move forward, call me Sunday night, and we can set up a meeting with the attorneys to finalize the details. If you decide against it, call me anyway so I know your decision. I won't take it personally, and I genuinely hope we can remain friends regardless of what you choose." Walking home through the quiet streets, Marcus felt the weight of the decision settling around him like a heavy coat. The practical benefits were undeniable, but there were emotional complexities he was still trying to understand. Would Emma see this as an adventure or a betrayal of her mother's memory? Would he be able to maintain his sense of self while living in Victoria's wealthy world? And perhaps most importantly, was he prepared to spend a year pretending to be married to a woman he barely knew, even if it could secure Emma's future? That weekend, Marcus found himself paying closer attention to Emma's interactions with other children at the park near their apartment. He watched her make friends easily, but then grow quiet when conversations turned to things like family vacations or new toys. He noticed how carefully she took care of her few possessions, how she never asked for things she saw other kids enjoying. On Sunday evening, Marcus tucked Emma into bed with their usual ritual of reading 3 stories and talking about their plans for the next day. As he turned off her light, she called out softly, "Dad, do you think Mommy would want us to be happy?" The question caught him completely off guard. "Of course, sweetheart. Why do you ask?" "Sometimes I feel guilty when I have fun, like I'm forgetting about her. But then I think maybe she would be sad if we were always sad." Marcus sat back down on her bed, his heart breaking and healing simultaneously at his daughter's wisdom. "Your mommy loved you more than anything in the world, Emma. She would want you to have every possible happiness and opportunity. Being happy doesn't mean forgetting her. It means honoring the love she gave us by living the best lives we can." After Emma fell asleep, Marcus sat in his small living room and made his decision. He pulled out Victoria's business card and dialed her number. Victoria answered on the second ring, her voice immediately alert despite the late hour. "Marcus, have you made your decision?" "Yes," he said, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded. "I want to do this, but I need you to understand that Emma comes first in everything. If at any point this arrangement seems to be harming her emotionally, I'm out. Regardless of money or contracts." "I wouldn't expect anything less from you," Victoria replied, and he could hear genuine relief in her voice. "Can you meet me Tuesday evening at my attorney's office? We can sign the papers and discuss the timeline for moving forward." The next few days passed in a blur of practical preparations and emotional conversations. Marcus had to tell Emma about their upcoming changes without revealing the full complexity of the arrangement. He settled on explaining that Victoria was a friend whose daughter went to Emma's school, and that they would be staying with Victoria's family for a while to help each other out. Emma's reaction surprised him. Rather than being upset about leaving their apartment, she seemed excited about the prospect of living in a big house and having a potential friend nearby. Her resilience continued to amaze Marcus, though he wondered if she was simply becoming used to major changes in her life. Mrs. Chen cried when Marcus told her they would be moving, but she also expressed happiness that Emma would have better opportunities. "That little girl deserves every good thing," she said, pressing a container of homemade cookies into Marcus's hands. "You tell her to come visit me anytime she wants." Tuesday evening found Marcus sitting in a law office that probably cost more to furnish than he made in a year. Victoria's attorney, David Chen, was a methodical man who walked them through every clause of the agreement with meticulous attention to detail. The contract protected both parties while ensuring Emma's needs remained the top priority. "The most important thing to remember," David explained, "is that this arrangement must appear completely natural to outside observers. The opposing legal team will be looking for any evidence that this marriage is merely a business transaction. Your interactions in public need to reflect genuine affection and partnership." Marcus felt a flutter of anxiety. "What exactly does that mean?" Victoria answered before the attorney could respond. "It means we need to seem comfortable with each other. Simple things like holding hands at school events, standing close together at social functions, using affectionate language when others are around. Nothing inappropriate, just the natural intimacy you'd expect from a married couple. We should also discuss your background story," David added. You'll need a consistent narrative about how you met and fell in love. The simpler and closer to truth, the better. They spent the next hour crafting their story. Victoria and Marcus had met through Emma's connection to Olivia at school, had bonded over both being single parents, and had gradually developed feelings for each other. Their quick marriage could be explained by wanting to provide stability for their daughters and not seeing any point in waiting when they knew what they wanted. After signing the papers and receiving his first payment, Marcus walked out of the law office feeling like he had entered an alternate reality. The check in his pocket represented more money than he had ever imagined having. Yet he felt strangely detached from the enormity of what had just happened. Victoria drove him home that night, giving him a chance to see her in a more casual setting. She had changed from her business suit into jeans and a sweater, and Marcus was struck by how much more approachable she seemed when she wasn't in corporate executive mode. "Are you having second thoughts?" she asked as they sat in her car outside his apartment building. "Honestly, I'm terrified," Marcus admitted. "Not about the money or the living situation, but about whether I can convincingly play the role of someone who belongs in your world." "Can I tell you something?" Victoria said, turning to face him. "I'm terrified too. I've never been married to anyone I wasn't actually in love with. I have no idea how to navigate the emotional complexities of sharing a home with someone when it's essentially a business relationship." Her honesty was refreshing. "So we're both completely out of our depth." "Completely," she agreed with a laugh. "But I think that might actually work in our favor. We're both motivated to make this succeed, and neither of us has unrealistic expectations about what it's going to be like." The moving process happened faster than Marcus had anticipated. Victoria arranged for professional movers to pack and transport their belongings, which took all of 3 hours given how little he and Emma owned. Watching strangers carefully wrap Emma's drawings and Sarah's books felt surreal, like watching someone else's life being dismantled and relocated. Victoria's house was even more impressive than Marcus had imagined. Set on 2 acres in an exclusive suburb, it was the kind of place he had only seen in magazines. But Victoria had clearly made an effort to make their wing of the house feel welcoming, rather than intimidating. Emma's new bedroom was painted in soft purple, her favorite color, and included a reading nook by the window and shelves for all her books. "How did you know purple was her favorite?" Marcus asked as Emma explored her new space with obvious delight. "I asked her the day I met her at school pickup," Victoria replied. "I also asked about books and noticed she mentioned loving stories about brave girls, so I stocked the shelves accordingly." The thoughtfulness of these details impressed Marcus more than all the expensive furnishings. Victoria had clearly invested time and energy in making Emma feel welcomed and valued, not just accommodated. Olivia turned out to be a delightful surprise. At 9 years old, she was slightly older than Emma, but seemed genuinely excited to have another child in the house. The 2 girls connected immediately over a shared love of art projects and silly jokes, and Marcus could see relief in Victoria's face as she watched them interact naturally. Their first dinner together as a family was awkward but not uncomfortable. The dining room could have seated 12 people, but Victoria had set up a smaller table in the breakfast nook, creating a more intimate atmosphere. The conversation flowed easier than expected, with the girls filling any silences with chatter about school and plans for the weekend. After Emma and Olivia went upstairs to play, Marcus and Victoria sat in the kitchen drinking coffee and debriefing their first day as housemates. "That went better than I expected," Victoria said. "The girls seem to really like each other." "Emma's been lonely for companionship," Marcus replied. "She's good at making friends, but living with just me, she doesn't get enough interaction with kids her age." "What about you? How are you feeling about all this?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Strange, but not bad strange. Your house is beautiful, and you've gone out of your way to make us feel welcome. I think the hardest part is going to be remembering that this isn't real when it starts feeling natural." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that too. We're going to be sharing daily routines and family responsibilities. It would be impossible to maintain completely artificial interactions for 12 months. I think we need to let ourselves develop a genuine friendship while keeping clear boundaries about what this relationship is and isn't." "Agreed," Marcus said. "And speaking of boundaries, what happens when we need to be affectionate in public? I want to make sure we're both comfortable with whatever that looks like." "We can start small and see what feels natural," Victoria suggested. Hand-holding, maybe a quick kiss on the cheek at social events. Nothing that makes either of us uncomfortable, but enough to appear like a couple who cares about each other. As Marcus settled into his new bedroom that night, he reflected on how surreal his life had become in just a few weeks. Emma was sleeping peacefully down the hall in a room that was bigger than their entire previous apartment, and he was about to spend a year pretending to be married to a woman who was quickly becoming a friend. The arrangement still felt impossible and overwhelming, but for the first time in years, Marcus fell asleep without worrying about money, without planning how to juggle his work schedules, and without wondering if he was failing Emma as a father. Whatever challenges lay ahead, at least Emma would have opportunities he could never have provided on his own. 3 months into their arrangement, Marcus was surprised by how naturally their unconventional family had settled into daily routines. Emma was thriving at Riverside Academy, coming home each day with stories about advanced art classes and science experiments that would have been impossible at her previous school. More importantly, she seemed genuinely happy for the first time since Sarah's death. The transformation in Emma wasn't just academic. Living with Olivia had given her the sibling relationship she had always wanted, and Victoria had proven to be remarkably intuitive about what Emma needed emotionally. She never tried to replace Sarah, but she offered guidance and support in ways that complemented Marcus's parenting rather than competing with it. Marcus himself had found unexpected fulfillment in his new role. Victoria had encouraged him to quit his evening cleaning job, arguing that his presence at home for family dinners and homework time was more valuable than the additional income. He had kept his day job in building maintenance, partly for the sense of independence it provided, and partly because he genuinely enjoyed the work. Their public appearances as a couple had evolved more smoothly than either had anticipated. At school events and social gatherings, they had developed a comfortable dynamic that felt natural rather than forced. Marcus discovered that Victoria's friends and colleagues were less intimidating than he had expected, and his genuine personality had won over even the most skeptical members of her social circle. The custody battle, however, was proving more contentious than Victoria had hoped. Her ex-husband Richard had hired an aggressive legal team that seemed determined to paint her as a cold, career-obsessed woman who had married Marcus purely for appearance's sake. Private investigators had been following them, looking for evidence that their marriage was fraudulent. "They photographed us at the grocery store yesterday," Victoria told Marcus one evening after the girls had gone upstairs. "Apparently, the fact that we shopped together and share domestic responsibilities is either evidence of a genuine relationship or proof that we're very committed to maintaining our charade." Marcus felt a surge of protective anger on Victoria's behalf. What kind of person tries to take a child away from a loving mother just because she's successful? "The kind who's never gotten over losing control," Victoria replied bitterly. "Richard can't stand that I built a business empire while he inherited his family's money and ran it into the ground. Taking Olivia isn't about what's best for her. It's about punishing me for succeeding where he failed." The stress of the legal proceedings was taking its toll on Victoria, and Marcus found himself genuinely worried about her well-being. She was working longer hours, eating less, and he often heard her pacing in her study late at night when she couldn't sleep. One particularly difficult evening, after Victoria's lawyer had called with news that Richard's team was demanding psychological evaluations for both parents, Marcus found her sitting in the kitchen staring blankly at a cup of cold coffee. "Talk to me," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "You've been carrying this alone for too long." Victoria looked up at him with exhausted eyes. "What if I lose her, Marcus? What if all of this, including dragging you and Emma into my mess, was for nothing?" Without thinking, Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time they had touched outside of their public performances, and he was struck by how natural the gesture felt. "You're not going to lose her," he said firmly. "Olivia loves you, and anyone who spends 5 minutes with you can see how devoted you are to her. Richard can hire all the lawyers he wants, but he can't manufacture the kind of mother-daughter bond you two have." Victoria squeezed his hand gratefully. "Sometimes I wonder if I made the wrong choices. Maybe if I had been content to be a traditional stay-at-home mother, none of this would be happening." "Stop," Marcus said gently but firmly. "Olivia is proud of what you've accomplished. She brags about you to Emma constantly. You've shown her that women can be strong, independent, and successful. That's a gift, not a failure. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing her eyes sleepily. "Dad, I had a bad dream about Mommy again. Can you come sit with me?" Marcus started to rise, but Victoria squeezed his hand again. "Go," she whispered. "We can talk more tomorrow." As Marcus tucked Emma back into bed and listened to her describe her dream about Sarah being lost and unable to find them, he realized how much their living situation had actually helped his daughter process her grief. Having Olivia as a constant companion and Victoria as a gentle female presence had given Emma permission to miss her mother without feeling like she was burdening Marcus with her sadness. "Dad," Emma said quietly as he was about to leave her room, "do you think Victoria is sad about something? She seemed worried at dinner." Marcus was constantly amazed by his daughter's emotional intelligence. "She is worried about something, but it's grown-up stuff that she and I are working on together." "Do you like living here with Victoria and Olivia?" "I love it," Emma said immediately. "Olivia is like the sister I always wanted, and Victoria helps me with my math homework in a way that makes it actually fun. She doesn't try to be like Mommy, but she's really nice to us. What would you think if I told you that Victoria might need us to help her feel better the way she's helped us?" Emma considered this seriously. "Like how Mrs. Chen helped us when Mommy was sick. We should definitely help Victoria if she needs it." The next morning brought a breakthrough in the custody case. Victoria's private investigator had uncovered evidence that Richard had been hiding assets offshore and had failed to report significant gambling debts to the court. More damaging still, witnesses had come forward describing incidents where Richard had lost his temper with Olivia during his supervised visits. "This changes everything," David Chen explained during an emergency meeting in Victoria's study. "Richard's team was building their case on painting you as an unfit mother, but now we can demonstrate that he's been dishonest with the court and potentially harmful to Olivia's emotional well-being." Victoria's relief was palpable, but Marcus noticed she still seemed tense. After the lawyer left, he found her standing in the garden, watching Emma and Olivia play on the swing set. "You should be celebrating," he said, joining her by the window. "This is the news you've been hoping for." "I know, and I am grateful," Victoria replied. "But now I'm facing a different kind of anxiety. If we win the custody case in the next few months, what happens to us? To this arrangement?" Marcus had been wondering the same thing. Their contract specified a full year regardless of the custody outcome, but he knew Victoria well enough now to understand that she was questioning whether continuing the arrangement would be fair to him and Emma if it was no longer necessary for its original purpose. "Are you trying to get rid of us?" he asked with a smile, trying to lighten the mood. "Just the opposite," Victoria said, then paused as if surprised by her own words. "I've gotten used to having you and Emma here. This house feels like a home in a way it never did when it was just Olivia and me. But I also know this wasn't supposed to be permanent for you." Before Marcus could respond, Olivia came running up to the patio door, breathless with excitement. "Mom, Dad, Emma and I want to plant a garden together. Can we have a section of the backyard for vegetables and flowers?" The casual way Olivia had referred to Marcus as Dad stopped both adults in their tracks. It was the first time either child had used family terms that reflected their current living arrangement, and Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions at hearing it. Victoria recovered first. "That sounds like a wonderful project. We can go to the garden center this weekend and pick out everything you need." After the girls ran back to their play, Marcus and Victoria stood in comfortable silence, both processing what had just happened. "She's never called anyone else Dad," Victoria said quietly. "Even when Richard was in our lives more consistently, she always called him by his first name. How do you feel about that?" Marcus asked. "Grateful," Victoria replied without hesitation. "You've been more of a father figure to her in 3 months than Richard has been in her entire life. You show up for school events, help with homework, and actually listen when she talks about her day. That's what being a dad means." That evening, Marcus lay in bed thinking about how dramatically his life had changed since that night when he first met Victoria in her office. What had started as a desperate financial decision had evolved into something that felt remarkably like a real family. Emma was happier and more confident than she had been since Sarah's death, and he had found himself caring deeply about both Victoria and Olivia's well-being. The arrangement that had once seemed impossible and artificial now felt like the most natural thing in the world. But Marcus knew that success in the custody case would force them all to confront difficult questions about what came next, and whether the relationships they had built could survive the transition from necessity to choice. 6 weeks later, Victoria won full custody of Olivia. The judge's ruling was decisive, citing Richard's financial dishonesty and documented instances of emotional instability as clear evidence that Olivia's best interests lay with her mother. Richard's supervised visitation rights were maintained, but his dreams of taking Olivia away from Victoria were definitively ended. The celebration that night was subdued, despite the magnitude of the victory. Emma and Olivia were thrilled that their living arrangement would continue unchanged, but Marcus and Victoria found themselves grappling with questions that success had made unavoidable. "So what happens now?" Victoria asked as they sat in her study after putting the girls to bed. "The original reason for our arrangement no longer exists." Marcus had been dreading this conversation while simultaneously looking forward to it. Over the past months, his feelings about their relationship had grown increasingly complicated. What had begun as a purely transactional arrangement had evolved into something that felt genuinely meaningful, but he wasn't sure if Victoria shared that perspective. "Technically, our contract runs for another 6 months regardless," he said carefully, "but I understand if you feel like the arrangement has served its purpose." Victoria studied his face intently. "Is that what you want? To honor the contract and then go back to your previous life?" The question forced Marcus to confront feelings he had been trying to suppress. "Honestly, I don't know if I can go back. Not because of the money or the comfortable lifestyle, but because this feels like home now. Emma is thriving, you and Olivia have become family to us, and I've never been happier." "But," Victoria prompted, sensing his hesitation, "but I also know that what we have isn't real in the traditional sense. We're both free to date other people. We maintain separate bedrooms, and our relationship exists primarily for practical and legal reasons. I don't want to overstep boundaries or assume that your feelings have changed just because mine have." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming nervously on her desk. "Can I tell you something I probably shouldn't admit? I haven't even thought about dating other people since you moved in, not because the contract prohibits it, but because I haven't wanted to. What we've built together feels more real and meaningful than my actual marriage ever did." Her words sent a surge of hope through Marcus, but he forced himself to remain cautious. "Victoria, you were under enormous stress during the custody battle. It's natural that you would feel grateful and attached to someone who supported you through that. But now that the crisis is over, you might find that your feelings change." "Do you think your feelings will change?" she asked directly. Marcus met her gaze steadily. "No, if anything, I think they'll only get stronger. But I need to know that we're making decisions based on genuine emotion, not just comfort and convenience." Victoria stood up and walked to the window overlooking the garden where Emma and Olivia had planted their vegetables. The summer crops were beginning to flourish, a tangible symbol of the growth that had taken place in all their lives. "I have a proposition," she said finally. "Let's modify our arrangement. Instead of maintaining separate lives that happen to overlap, let's try dating each other, really dating like two people who are interested in building a romantic relationship." Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate. "What does that look like practically?" "We continue living together, but we start exploring whether there's a romantic connection beyond our friendship and mutual respect. We go on actual dates, spend time together without the girls, and see if what we feel is based on genuine attraction or just gratitude and convenience." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. "And if it doesn't work? If we discover that we're better as friends and co-parents than as romantic partners? Then we figure out how to maintain our friendship and continue co-parenting the girls, even if it means adjusting our living situation." "But Marcus, I think we owe it to ourselves to find out what this could be if we stop limiting it to business arrangement." They spent the next hour talking through the practical and emotional implications of transitioning from their contractual relationship to something more authentic. It would mean renegotiating boundaries, having honest conversations with the girls about what was happening, and accepting the risk that exploring romance could potentially damage the friendship they had built. Their first official date took place the following Saturday. Victoria's housekeeper agreed to stay late with Emma and Olivia, giving Marcus and Victoria an evening to themselves for the first time since moving in together. Victoria had made reservations at an intimate restaurant downtown, but Marcus suggested they start with something more casual. "I want to take you somewhere that's meaningful to me," he said, driving toward a part of town Victoria had never visited. "If we're going to do this, I want you to see all aspects of who I am, not just the version that fits comfortably into your world." He took her to Murphy's Diner, a family-owned restaurant where he and Sarah had shared their first date 15 years earlier. The vinyl booths were worn, the lighting was harsh, and the menu consisted primarily of comfort food and strong coffee. It was the exact opposite of the expensive restaurants Victoria was accustomed to. "Sarah and I came here every Friday night for 3 years when we were first married," Marcus explained as they settled into a corner booth. "We couldn't afford fancy places, but old Murphy always made us feel welcome. And the apple pie was the best in the city." Victoria looked around the diner with genuine interest rather than the polite tolerance he had expected. "This is perfect. I spend so much time in sterile business environments and upscale social venues. There's something refreshing about a place that prioritizes comfort over appearance." Their conversation over dinner flowed naturally from the serious topics they had been navigating to lighter subjects they had never had time to explore. Marcus learned that Victoria had wanted to be a teacher before her father convinced her to join the family business. Victoria discovered that Marcus wrote poetry in his spare time and had once considered pursuing a degree in literature. "Why didn't you?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Life got in the way," Marcus replied. "Sarah got pregnant with Emma. I needed steady work, and poetry doesn't pay the bills. But I still write sometimes, usually when I'm processing difficult emotions. Would you share some of your writing with me sometime? I'd love to read it." The request touched Marcus more than he expected. Sarah had been the only person who had ever shown interest in his poetry, and her encouragement had meant everything to him. After dinner, they walked through the downtown area, talking and window shopping like a couple getting to know each other for the first time. When Victoria slipped her hand into his, it felt natural rather than performative, and Marcus realized that the physical attraction he had been trying to suppress was definitely mutual. "This feels different," Victoria said as they stood outside a bookstore, looking at the displays in the window. "Different how? Different from when we hold hands at school events or social functions. This feels like a choice rather than an obligation." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "Everything about tonight feels like a choice. A good choice." They returned home to find Emma and Olivia asleep on the living room couch, surrounded by art supplies and the remnants of what appeared to have been an epic craft project. Marcus and Victoria stood in the doorway, watching their daughters sleep peacefully, and both felt the weight of how much was at stake in their evolving relationship. "Whatever happens between us," Victoria whispered, "we can't let it affect their friendship and stability." "Agreed," Marcus replied, "but I have a good feeling about this." Over the following weeks, Marcus and Victoria continued dating while living in the same house, a situation that was both convenient and challenging. They had to navigate the complexity of building a romantic relationship while maintaining their roles as co-parents and housemates. Emma and Olivia were surprisingly adaptable to the changing dynamics. When Marcus and Victoria explained that they were exploring the possibility of their arrangement becoming a real marriage, both girls expressed enthusiasm and support. "Does this mean you might actually fall in love with each other?" Emma asked with the directness that only children possess. "We're trying to find out," Victoria replied honestly. "How would you feel if we did?" "I think it would be awesome," Emma said immediately. "You already act like you love each other, so it would just make it official." The simplicity of Emma's perspective reminded both adults that their situation, while unconventional, wasn't necessarily complicated. They had built a foundation of friendship, respect, and shared values. The question now was whether they could build romantic love on that foundation. 3 months after their first official date, Marcus had his answer. He was completely, undeniably in love with Victoria Sterling, not as a business partner or co-parent, but as a woman who had become essential to his happiness and sense of completeness. On a quiet Sunday morning, as he watched Victoria help the girls with a science project while humming softly to herself, Marcus realized that what had started as a desperate financial arrangement had become the greatest blessing of his life. Emma had gained not just financial security and educational opportunities, but also a loving stepmother and sister who would enrich her life forever. That evening, after the girls were in bed, Marcus found Victoria in her study reading over some business documents. Without saying a word, he walked over to her desk, gently moved the papers aside and took her hands in his. "I love you," he said simply. "Not because you saved us financially, not because you've given Emma incredible opportunities, but because you're an amazing woman who makes me want to be a better man every single day." Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she stood up and moved into his arms. "I love you too, Marcus. I've been afraid to say it because I thought you might think it was just gratitude or convenience. But it's so much more than that." Their first real kiss was everything Marcus had hoped it would be. Tender and passionate and full of promise for the future they were building together. 6 months later, Marcus and Victoria had a second wedding ceremony, this one based on love rather than legal necessity. Emma served as maid of honor while Olivia was the flower girl, and both girls beamed with pride as their parents exchanged vows that reflected their genuine commitment to each other. As Marcus looked out at the small gathering of family and friends who had come to celebrate their unusual love story, he thought about how dramatically his life had changed since that night when Victoria had made her shocking proposition. What had seemed like an impossible arrangement had become the foundation for a love deeper and more meaningful than anything he had ever imagined possible. The billionaire's offer had indeed changed everything, but not in the way either of them had expected. Instead of simply solving their immediate problems, it had led them to discover that sometimes the most unconventional beginnings can lead to the most extraordinary endings.